Started tonight. This week, we continue with financial management principles and historical perspectives. The historical perspective is kind of the future of where we're headed. So you had a good bit of reading to do this week. You had a case study to look at, and so we'll continue with that tonight. Looking at our evidence artifacts. As I told you, we would, in week 14, I'll do a quick review of skip task 1 and 2. You should be past those by now, but I'll cover 3 and 4 tonight, and also task 1. My plan is I'll go ahead and get task 1 tonight. So my plan is to give you a jump on the summer work. I'll cover the rest of the CAP next week. Remind me to do that. We've only got 2 more sessions. And then in the last session, I will cover the SIOP template that I've made for you. Please remember that the SIOP is there is no new work in the SIOP. It's simply cut and paste parts of other evidence artifacts that we've already done. So the SIOP shouldn't take you too long. So if you go in, if you will be quick this summer and knock out your other 3 tasks of your CAP right quick, it shouldn't take you very long, and I mean less than a week, to put your SIOP together. You should be able to make the deadline. Please remember that the deadline is going to be around July 4th. The soft deadline, then the hard deadline will be 2 weeks before graduation. Any later than that, and I can't get your name in the program for add-on licensure people. I'm trying to get certificates printed. We only have a very short time this summer. So it would behoove you to move right on through the CAP as quickly as you can. You can just about knock it out in the time that we're on break. Summer school will start again on May the 21st. And so you've got a very short period of time. I know that's a busy season. You'll only have maybe a week or so before review and exams start and all that if you're at public school. So I would try to work on through the break with my teams, if at all possible, and knock out the CAP. And then the SIOP will go fairly quickly. And as I said, I'll cover that one for you on the last 9 of class in 2 weeks. Next week, I'm going to cover task 2, 3, and 4 of the CAP for you as well. So with that said, let me quickly get to the skip. All right, so in prompt 1, you led your team to do a needs assessment for the gap in communication. That's the one thing that seemed to be having the most problem with. Folks did needs assessments of all kinds of things. The purpose of this was not to go back and replow the ground that we did in the AppSell and the AppTell. This is something completely different. This is about school and community relationships and parent relationships. And we find the biggest barrier is communication. So the idea was your short-term goals were to be communication-based, and if at all possible, to use social media to help you communicate with those stakeholders, parents and community. Then your long-term goals is, once you had gotten them hooked, once you were communicating with them, to do events at your school that would lead to increased test scores. Now, I had this sermon last night in class. If you don't believe that test scores matter, and you're one of those people that argue that test scores aren't really a good indicator of what kids know and what schools do, then you need to get out. You need to get out now. You don't teach a soul when you become an administrator. You don't do the work of the organization. Your job is to make the organization more efficient and to increase student achievement. Now, whether you agree with it or not, student achievement is measured by standardized assessments, the exams that we give, the state exams. And so that's what comes out on the report card. And so the whole notion here is in the AppSell, you look for learning programs to help you better address the gaps in your academic scores. In the AppTel, you put together a staff development plan, a growth plan to grow your staff to be better, to be better empowered in their classrooms, to be classroom leaders, to increase student performance. In the OMA, you learned how to link your budget, your master schedule, and your school improvement plan together for the purpose of funding and supporting that school improvement plan. The SCIP now looks at how to involve others, stakeholders, in increasing student achievement. So you were to start with gaps in communication, and then once you had those gaps closed, you were to put things together like family math night, family reading night, family EOG night, college fairs, things where you bring parents and community members into your building for the purpose of getting them involved in helping to educate their children. Impromptu, you were to do an assessment of your school leadership by using the school leadership section from the teacher working conditions survey, or if you were in South Carolina, from your assessment survey. You were to look specifically at school leadership. What can school leadership do to be better? Then, as we move into task 2, you were to identify the fiscal and human resources that it would take to put in place your long and short-term goals. Fiscal being money, human resources being personnel. And you were to summarize that in a graphic. All right, now, task 3, the marketing plan puts it all together. So you develop a marketing plan. It looks just like your action plan from your AppSell, looks just like your growth plan from the AppTel. It uses that same format where you take and you write a paragraph for each one of these. Where there's a box right here, you write a paragraph for each one of these. And then you summarize that plan in a graphic organizer, the same one we've been using. It starts out with what specific activities. Your specific activities are your long and short-term goals from task 1 and your recommendations for improved leadership in task 1, prompt 2. And then you add those financial resources that you identified in task 2, and then you put that all together so you have your specific activities. That will be at least one short-term goal, at least one long-term goal, and at least one recommendation for school leadership improvement. Now, you'll probably have more than that, but those are the 3. That's the minimum. You got to have at least one short-term, one long-term, one recommendation. You've already identified your resources, so the person's responsible. That's why we had you identify your human resources necessary to do that. That's the person responsible. Then the resources is the money, the timeline, when you're going to do it. Please remember, formative assessment is not of the actual measuring the end result. That's summative assessment. Formative assessment is making sure that the adults are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that they're implementing with fidelity. That's what formative assessment is. Then summative assessment is going to be, are we moving test scores in this building by doing these things? Our goal, if we're at 65, our goal is 85. An indicator of success would be going from 65 to 70. Please remember, it's worthy to have goals that are lofty, but it's I've got to choose my language carefully here. It's not realistic to expect a 20-point jump in scores in 1 year. A more realistic indicator of success would be 5. That's 1 standard deviation. One of the things that always bothered me in the school business when I'd be handed goals from the central office and they wanted it all done in 1 year. When I was in the principal's office, when I held that position, the 14 years that I was a principal, the central office will, we'd like for your scores to be here. Well, what? And I would ask, well, what would be an acceptable amount of growth for this year? Oh, we want it all in 1 year. Well, I know that you have faith in me, or you wouldn't have hired me. But now, I'm not a miracle worker. We're going to have to make these for example, if you're looking for a 20-point gain, that's 4 standard deviations. That's 4 years. If you score more than 2 standard deviations above the mean, above where you've been scoring in any 1 year, your scores will be invalidated. It's nearly impossible to score more than 2 standard deviations above where you are. And so your marketing plan has the specific activities are the short-term and long-term goals and your recommendations for improvement of school leadership. You've already identified the persons responsible through the human resources in task 2. You've already identified the money that it's going to take. You know what formative assessment is. You know what summative assessment. You know your long-term goals in terms of academic achievement. You know what a valid indicator of success would be. You know, it's usually 1 standard deviation or 5 points a year. And then that summarizes that. And so that's your marketing plan. Look at what you did in the AppSell and the AppTell in terms of the action plan and the growth plan. Now, skip task 4. You are to write 12 of your competencies, and then you will write the other 9 just like you did before. Let's see now. Did we finish up? Where are we on our competencies? Did we do 12 with the OMA? Then do the other 9 with this one. So do 12 and 9, and then that will leave you 1 more round to do during the cap and the skip. We normally have you skip them for the cap and just go ahead and do all of them when you do the skip. You don't. If you'll look at the cap, there is no task that requires you to do competencies, but there is one in the SOP, the last one, that requires you to do them all. So if we've already done 12, you do the 9 that you didn't do during the OMA, and you're good to go for task 4. Okay. So everybody, any questions at all about the skip? Some of you are making this too hard. You're adding extra things in. Don't do it. Just follow right through. If you did 1 and 2, marketing plan is easy because you've already done all the work for it. You've already identified your goals, your specific activities, your resources, the people, all that stuff. You've already done it. Just write it up in a narrative form, then put it in that graphic organizer, and you're good to go. Do your other 9 competencies. You should be done fairly quickly. Now, moving on to the cap. Task 1. Task 1 is the easiest one, but it's the one students get wrong the most because they don't follow the directions. I'm going to read this. This is not a gag. This is not a joke. This is not a gotcha. So it's kind of like, when I get to this point every year, it's always, I ask students, you know, the old question, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Grant. It's not a fake question. The analysis of the climate will include data related to the 5 areas that the North Carolina State Board of Education have identified to measure. These areas include empowerment, leadership, that's school leadership. Empowerment is teacher leadership. If you can't remember that, write it down. Empowerment is the section in the TWC that's called teacher leadership. The one that's here that says leadership is school leadership, facilities, resources, and time. So what I expect to see is South Carolina people go to your survey, North Carolina people go to TWC, pull these 5 individual sections and do an analysis of them. Find the lowest one. And basically, when you do the needs assessment, you resurvey those 5 items, a minimum of 5, 1 from each of these 5 areas. You survey those same 5 items again, where you ask the staff, are these really low? See, they answered over 100 questions when they did these surveys. Now you're just going to give them 5 to focus on. You're going to come up with the lowest item from each of these 5 areas. Don't add extra areas. That's where people get this wrong. We're going to focus throughout the CAP just on these 5. Now, we may add some more things later, but we're never going to get away from these 5. When we do our needs assessment, we don't just skip over to PBIS and managing student conduct. No, the needs assessment are on these 5. It's not a trick. We're not pulling your leg here, telling you to do 5 and then send it back for revision and tell you, oh, you didn't do managing student conduct or you didn't do community. No, just these 5. Focus on these 5. And so when you look at the sections, obviously there's multiple items or questions for each of these sections. You find the 1 or 2 that are the lowest, and you survey monkey those back out to your faculty and say, you know, are these things a problem? Are these things a problem at our school? That's how you do CAP prompt 1 and prompt 2 of task 1. You do an analysis of those 5 areas. You show me you copy and paste from your survey and show me all your data. This one's the lowest. That's, you know, I picked this one to be this item or this question in this section is the lowest. That's the one I'm going to survey back to faculty, because later on we're going to have you go out and do some qualitative work. Qualitative is interview and observation. So we're going to go ask people, why is this low? And what you may find, and then the follow-up question is going to be, what can we do to fix it? Now, the classic example here is under time. Teachers will tell you, I don't have enough planning time. And so that would portend that we'd need to try to find a way to put more time in the master schedule. But we know if we put more planning time in the master schedule, what will that do to our class sizes? It will make them get out of whack. And so what we can do is go out and ask people, why don't you have enough planning time? And 9 times out of 10, what they'll tell you is, oh, I have plenty of time scheduled in the daily schedule, but I never get to use it because I'm always covering classes. So the fix is not to put more planning time in the master schedule, which we know is not an appropriate thing to do. The fix is to hire substitutes. Now, why wouldn't a school want to hire substitutes? Anybody want to venture a guess? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if they don't spend that money, the school district gets to keep it for substitutes. That's the money that you ride on when you're in the central office. When you want to go on a trip or go to a conference, that's money that's loose and can be nabbed. And so unused funds for teacher substitutes revert to the central office, and central office people can use them. So if they have this conference that they really need to go to that's in Austin in June, then they can go. Now, nobody ever goes to El Paso in the summertime, but everybody wants to go to Austin. It's amazing how the best conferences are in Las Vegas or Austin in good weather, or you know what I'm talking about, or New York City in the summertime. Well, if you're in the central office, where do you find the money for your staff development? Well, you find it from unused funds for substitutes. And so one of the things you have to demand as teachers and as school staff and even principals and as a principal, you need to make sure that you don't fall in that trap of, oh, we'll just have the teachers on that team cover that person that's out. Because you know what always suffers is planning time. You're supposed to have 5 hours a week of planning time. Now, if there's an emergency, you can get by that, but as a regular thing, you're not supposed to be covering classes. So that's just an example of sometimes the data, the quantitative data, doesn't really tell us the story. It just tells us what's low. The survey is, the teacher working conditions survey is quantitative data. Sometimes we have to do some qualitative work where we go out and ask people, why is this low? Because that's what informs those numbers. The numbers themselves sometimes are misleading. So that's how you get started on the CAP. The mistake that you can make there is ignoring what it tells you to do. Empowerment, leadership, facilities, resources, and time, and skipping over on PBIS and managing student conduct. Now, later on, there's a place where you can add that if you want to, but that doesn't mean you get to not add these 5 things. I should see these 5 things in all 4 tasks of the CAP. These 5 things come first. Then you can add some other things later. It will give you the opportunity to do that. But it does not give you the opportunity or permission to not include these 5 things in each of the 4 tasks. That's the biggest problem I have with the CAP. Everybody wants to do what they want to do, not reading the directions here. These 5 will not go away. They will be the basis of each task and each prompt that you do in the CAP. These 5 will be the basis. There is a place for you to add PBIS and managing student conduct later, but this is not it. Questions you have for me about getting started on the CAP? As I said, next week I'll cover all of the CAP. So some of you are getting to the CAP now a little ahead of the game. I wanted to make sure I hit it tonight. Next week I'm going to cover all of the CAP. The following week I'll cover the PSYOP. Now, if you've been following along the game plan here, where you've been putting all these together, all your action plan, your growth plan, your marketing plan, and now you will do your CAP cultural advocacy plan. You do that with all your plans. If you've been using a common graphic organizer, when we get to the PSYOP, you're going to really like me for the first time ever, because you're going to be asked to put all these together and come up with your school improvement plan. And all you got to do is stack them together because you got everything you need in. And that's what will make the PSYOP really easy. And I know you've seen the template for the PSYOP, and I don't want to take all of our time tonight on that, but I'll cover that in 2 weeks. And it's just plug and play. I'm telling you, the PSYOP will be easy if you've been following along the directions. Let's see. I think I'm going to, let's see. Now, who do y'all have for your clinical coach? Dr. Stedman? Yeah. So y'all will stay with him this summer.
I have you.
You have, well, yeah, I know, but I mean, other than me.
Yay!
Yay! But other than me, so even though I won't have y'all in class this summer, you'll still have Dr. Stedman, and we'll continue on, and he is in on the plan as well. So y'all shouldn't, regardless of who you have to instruct you, it shouldn't be a big change. And so we'll just move you right on through. So I feel good about where we are. Questions about the CAP or the skip? Fairly simple stuff. All right, let me get out of that. All right. So we covered that objective, task 3 and 4 tonight. All righty.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So our our tables and charts and all the stuff we've created for the skip, okay? That we just turned in or are about to turn in or whatever. Like they're all kind of the same, is what my group, me and Rory have figured out. They like kind of, you don't copy and paste, but they're pretty much alike. Is that supposed to be correct or no?
Yes.
Okay. So then I look into the CAP and I see that it looks like that's similar as well. Not copy and paste, change a few things around, but it's also similar. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I needed to know. Clarify. Thank you.
I mean, if you can kind of see through this continuous improvement process, everything is supposed to dovetail. Everything is supposed to fit. There's not supposed to be any parts of this program that just completely don't look like the rest. Everything is kind of the same system. We utilize the same terminology. We're meeting the same competencies. Our plans, whether they're growth plans or action plans or marketing plans, they're all in the same format. So that when we put them all together, we have a school improvement plan that is consistent, and everybody has a common knowledge base, and everybody understands all the terminology, the glossary, the operational definitions. Everybody understands that. That's how you get your teachers on board as an administrator. Everything becomes familiar to them. They understand the process.
So in between all this, real quick, not to interrupt. So you see like changes too, because like originally for me, my goal was the math night out, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So wonderful. Great. You said fabulous. Wonderful.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
One, Foundations of Math 1 kids who are really struggling, a bunch of EC kids, and a bunch of low learners, blah, blah, blah. So we did that math night, right? So now, after the math night, I see that there's other areas that need to be improved as well, as in like math night, and there were a few other areas. I mean, I listed it on the thing. I can't even think of it. There were several other areas. So adding to that is okay, because originally my plan was just math night, but now I'm looking, after having talked to my admin and math teachers and English teachers and figuring out how they do their math night and their English night, I see that there's other areas. So you understand, I guess, or see that there, or whatever, that there should be other areas that get included in this?
Yes, it grows.
Okay.
That's why it's called a continuous improvement process.
Okay, that was my
add more things to it. And if you use the same,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
If you use the same format, and that's why we had you do the same kinds of things in each of these, once you develop your routines and formats where you form your teams and you have a common set of norms and goals, they follow through on every one of these. That's why we spent so much time on that in the app cell, if you'll remember, because we told you, you're going to use this all the way through. This is the way we're going to do business. This is the corner of the realm. We're going to have you put plans together where we call them action plans, marketing plans, growth plans. You will add to those. The list will just get longer. That's called continuous improvement. You continue to add more things. And because you use the same format, you do needs assessments the same way, it just grows. And it gains momentum of its own. And that's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
We're trying to make the school improvement plan the heart of your organization, and how you grow and get better continually through the use of that, and the master schedule and your budget supports that school improvement plan.
So when I introduced all this to my principal, he said the same thing. He said, as you're going through this, you're going to see other areas that have to be improved as well, or other areas
that's the continuous improvement.
Emily, Emily may not be thinking the same thing as my principal, which his name is Tim. Tim and Emily aren't on the same page, but for this program, Emily thinks that it should go A, B, and C, but that's not originally what I thought. So it's okay to slide that in there too, right?
That's exactly right. See, when we
Okay.
talk about continuous improvement, people have the mistaken idea that we do the exact same things every year. We use the same format or the same process, but we continually add new things, but we do them the same way so that everybody understands the process. We get much more efficient. It's not, the learning curve is not very steep because we've done these things before, and we continue to add new things. We don't just do the same plan every year. We add new things as our plan goes and develops. That's called continuous improvement. That means our plan is never static. It's always changing. It's always growing. We're always adding new things and evolving. One of the things that always bothered me when I supervised principals is I'd look at their last year's plan before I'd go out and do the initial conference with the principal. At the start of the year, I'd look at last year's plan. I'd walk in, and then this year's plan didn't even look like last year's plan. And I'm like, it's just like, it's your day, your first day every day. You build the initial plan, and then you just keep that as a first year principal. You build that initial plan, and then you just keep that thing rolling and adding to it.
So on the skip, when you see like skip 1, I have devised this, but skip 2 keeps skip 1, but it adds this, and skip 3 adds this, and skip 4 is just a
putting it all
a
together.
summary.
And
you're okay. Okay, that's all I needed to know.
That's what we have you do each time. Is we have you during the task, you doing the parts, and then in the end you put it all together.
Okay. So when you see like building, and you see like building blocks, and you see us changing things around, that's what you expect to see.
That's exactly what's supposed to happen. Now,
okay.
I have told you, and I freely admit this, that I am an operations person. That there are two types of people in our business. There's operations people and there are curriculum people. Curriculum people are the smarter people, but the operations people understand how to make things work. Ideas are wonderful, but you got to put them in action. You got to develop systems and processes so that your ramping up phase is only one time, but you don't continually. It's not starting over every time you want a new initiative. You just add to what you've already got rolling. And once you get all of these plans going and it becomes one school improvement plan, you just add pieces to that and keep it rolling and keep it going. That's what operations people can kind of see, that matrix in our head that curriculum people can't see and have a hard time with conceptualizing that. But that's okay. And that's why you've got to learn these skills of how to put this thing together. I know it's a struggle for curriculum people to do this at times because it's you've got to be able to conceptualize the whole thing at once. But once you ever master this and you're a good curriculum person to boot, then you will be an excellent principal. If you have the curriculum skill, the instructional knowledge and base, the curriculum skill, and you can learn this management function of how to build these schedules and how to build a continuous improvement school improvement plan, you can't be beat because you've got it both. Now the problem comes in if you're an operations person like me, learning the curriculum piece. That's not as easy. It wasn't for me. The management piece came easy, learning the routines, putting systems in place. That part was easy for me, and so it made it easy for me to supervise principals. What made it hard was when I was a principal is learning the curriculum, catching on to what was going on, being able to monitor instruction. Really had to work hard at that piece. And so we have skills and abilities in each of those areas. But please remember, in the end, you are the leader of the organization. You must have leadership and management skills. You must learn how to put together a school improvement plan by law, and that is a continuous improvement model that is required. And so that's what we're trying to train you to be able to do. Good question. All right, let's talk about financing education equity or disparity. This is more a theoretical basis. It's specifically relevant now as we're moving into vouchers and charters. There's nothing wrong with that. I support both of those. I support public schools as well. People in charter schools would argue that they are public schools as well. They do use some public funds, but they are not traditional public schools. But there's room for everybody in the business. The issue becomes the money. And so is it desirable to equalize educational spending? And so it goes back to North Carolina had the Leandro case. And the Leandro case, we've already covered that earlier this semester, and I told you we'd revisit that. And that's kind of going to be the basis of tonight's talk about equity is some low wealth districts, and I think a couple of you may even be in those districts. Some low wealth districts back in the 90s sued the state of North Carolina over their funding model. They were looking, remember North Carolina works on the modified accrual accounting system where they give out money in 10 equal parts during the year for their per pupil expenditure, but we have a flat funding model, which means everybody from Murphy to Manteo gets the same amount per pupil. What the low wealth counties were arguing is that we want district power equalizing, or DPE. Now, district power equalizing takes into account the local wealth of a district. Please remember, there was a time when we used to hire a lot of local teachers with the local budget. There used to be three color. When I first got into business, you got a paper check. There was no electronic deposit because there was no electronic back then. So every month you got a paper check, and it was one of three colors. It was either blue, yellow, or green. Green check was federal if you worked in a federal program, like any of the CTE programs or Title I or exceptional children. Anybody that was paid from federal funds got a green check. The state check was blue. If you were a regular state paid teacher, if you were like an English teacher in a high school, you got a regular part of the state's teacher allotment, you got a blue check. But then you got a yellow check if you were a locally paid teacher. Well, since the economic crash of 2007, there haven't been a lot of locally paid teachers anymore, because a lot of the local budget, please remember, we talked about this earlier, local school districts are responsible for capital, which is buildings and grounds, not only building them, but maintaining them. And so most school budgets, local budgets now are going just to capital, to buildings and ground facilities. They don't have a lot of extra money to hire local teachers to help balance loads and keep from having combination classes and things like that anymore. We don't get a lot of those. and so, but even back in the 90s, low wealth districts were complaining that they didn't have the ability to tax their citizenry, and they didn't have a lot of industry. Remember, money that comes to the county, school boards are unempowered. All school money, public school money, comes from the county commissioners. School boards can't levy taxes. The county commissioners give you money to pay for capital for buildings and grounds, and maybe some extra for teachers, and they get that money from property taxes. Most residential property tax goes to pay for essential services, fire, water, police, those kinds of things. It's really corporate property tax that pays for schools. And a lot of the low wealth rural districts were claiming, look, we don't have the ability, we don't have the people here to tax, and so we don't get as much money, so we can't add as much to the state budget. For example, let's say the state's funding schools at $7,000 per pupil. A district like Charlotte-Mecklenburg at one time was adding about another $7 to that, and so they were spending about $14,000 per pupil. I think this year they're going to be somewhere at around $10. So even the mighty have fallen. I think I saw that their budget was going to be $1.6 billion, which would represent about $10,000 or $11,000 per pupil. That includes all funds, state funds included. And so there was a time when we were spending about $14, about 1.4 on about 100,000 students. So, but back in the day, the issue became Charlotte-Mecklenburg could add 7 to the 7 that the state was giving them and spend $14,000 per pupil to educate a public school student. Counties like Granville County weren't able to put any money. I mean, they were putting like $1,000, and so they were spending $8,000 per pupil, and Charlotte-Mecklenburg was spending $14,000 per pupil, and they said that's not fair. That's not equitable. These students they're both North Carolina students. What we want is district power equalizing. So what we want you to do is not give Charlotte-Mecklenburg, since they can spend 7, give them 3, and that'll be 10. Give us the other 4. And that will be that will be 10 for us, and so we can both spend $10,000 on our pupils. So Charlotte Mecklenburg still locally has to give the 7,000 that they're giving, but they only get 3 from the state, and that's called district power equalizing. It goes on your district's ability to pay. Well, that lawsuit dragged on for 4 years, and eventually the state prevailed. They did not change to a district power equalizing. The only thing that happened was a lottery, which has been worthless to public education, has put no money in public education. And so we're still stuck with high wealth districts being able to spend more than low wealth districts. And so that's really the notion here is what do we do to equalize between high wealth and low wealth areas? Now, the new argument on equity is charters and privates and church schools versus public schools. Now, I've already talked about the internal struggle for equity within the 114 public school districts in North Carolina and the 80 in South Carolina. So the same thing happens in South as in North in terms of the funding formula. It's, if you're in a wealthier area, there's more per pupil spent because of local. There's no district power equalizing in South Carolina either. It's flat funding just like North Carolina. So that's the argument within traditional public schools is, should we make it equitable how much is spent between all school districts, whether they're wealthy or poor? So far, the wealthy have won out. Nope. We're spending more on ours, and no, we're not giving any to the poor people. So it's still an argument, but Leandro case pretty much put the end to the legal battle on that one. Now the battle is between charter schools and private schools wanting the state to fund them at the same rate that they fund other public institutions. Now you say, well, how can a private school ask for money? Through vouchers, low wealth vouchers. And so right now the town of Matthews is trying to basically secede and form a charter school corporation for their town, and the school board in Charlotte Mecklenburg is about to put the hammer on them. They've threatened them today, either get back in line or we're going to hammer you. If you want to secede from us, fine, we won't give you any money. And they're not required to. And I've read you the state law. The only thing that right now that the local board of education is required to give charter schools are classrooms, not buildings, not money per pupil, just classrooms. So what do they give them? Used mobile units. That's all they're required to give them. The town of Matthews is trying to sue Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools and say, we want to form a charter and you're supposed to give us the same amount of money that the state gives. Now, the state funds do go with those students, but no local money goes with those students other than some used trailers. Let me be clear on that. So when you form a charter school in North or South Carolina, and the per pupil coming from the state is $7,000, you get that $7,000 from the state if you're that charter school. However, if there's $3,000 or $4,000 coming from the local from the local county or the city that you're in, I know Tracy's in Mooresville, which is a city. If there's $3,000 or $4,000 local money coming from the county commissioners or the town council, that money does not go to charter schools. The only thing the charter school gets from the local is some used trailers. The charters want that money. They want that $3,000 or $4,000 that the public school students are getting. They want that for their charter school. So that's the equity debate for charter schools. That again, I've already defined for you the internal debate on equity. The new debate on equity is external. If I form a charter school, I want that county to have to give me the same amount of money that they give the public schools and traditional public schools in that county. They have to give me the same amount per pupil as they give West Meck. That's the equity argument now. So far, all the county has to give is used trailers. Don't have to give any money. But that's the fight right now, is charter schools are fighting for that local funding, money, not trailers. They're fighting for that. They'll take the trailers, but they want some money to go along with it. Now,
I was going to say, we have an interesting situation here with a local charter school where children maybe switch from our public to the charter, and then they're not happy and they want to leave, but they're convinced to try it for a month. Is it true that after 30 days, they keep the funding for that child, even if the child leaves and comes back to the public school?
No. Funding comes monthly based on average daily membership.
Okay.
That's a modified accrual accounting system.
Okay.
Now, if there's any local funds that went, they do stay. Okay. State money doesn't stay. State money, because state money comes in 10 installments. It does not come all at one time. Okay. Well, but in effect, what the problem becomes is with that student is they come back, but you don't have the teachers for them, because you didn't have the enrollment, so you lost the teachers, and they come back. There's no additional teacher allotment, so people consider that to be the money not coming back with them. What they're talking about is personnel. The actual per pupil allotment of $7,000 per pupil from North Carolina, that never went. It went the month that they were there and they were on the roll. But as soon as they came back and they're on your roll, you get that money. But the problem is that allotment of teachers from the state, that does not come back during the year. So you're right on that piece. So let me be clear on that one. When the state doesn't give you the money for teachers, the state gives you positions. You get a position allotment. You get an allotment sheet, is what it's called. And it's based on, this is regular education teachers now. This is not CTE or special ed or any of those. We're talking about regular education teachers, like a sixth grade teacher at Tracy's place in Mooresville. Sixth grade teacher there. The number of teachers they get is based on their 20-day enrollment total. You have a 10-day, which is a soft number, and then at 20 days, that's how many personnel you get allotted by the state. Now, the problem is, if all these kids go over to charter school and you get 43 teachers, they come back a month later after that 20-day total is up, they come back, you don't get any more teachers. You get what you got. So that's where everybody screams and yells, Tracy. The actual per pupil money that comes to your district for those kids comes in 10 installments. It comes 10 times a year after, and it's based on your average daily membership, your percentage. So no, they don't keep money that the state sent them, because the state didn't send it. They might keep part of a month. Let's say they get paid for that kid, and the kid's there part of the month. You don't get the rest of that month on that kid. But what really throws the monkey wrench in is on staffing. Because you don't get money for teachers, you get the positions. And once 20 days is up, you're done. There is no additional allotment of teachers during the year. So that's why public schools get mad at charter schools about kids going over there and then coming back. It blows up their class sizes. It blows up their resources. That's a good point. All right, got a question. Let me answer this question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Allotments for the next year are just projections. That is correct. Thank you, Tracy, for that one. So that's Rory's question. Yeah. You get a projection sheet about this time of year for next year on what the district thinks your enrollment's going to be. And that used to drive me crazy in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. It didn't in the other two districts where I was principal. It didn't drive me crazy there because they didn't have pupil assignment. They just had boundaries, and every kid in that boundary, you had, over to Conley Road, over to, Highway 70 or whatever. This is your attendance area, so you knew how much it was going to be. If a new housing development came in, or a new trailer park, or or something like that, you could kind of see that. The problem in Charlotte-Mecklenburg is pupil assignment. There is no such thing as attendance lines in Charlotte-Mecklenburg for around your school. Pupil assignment changes, all the time. It means the lines change, and it may be that they just draw a circle around the community and send them to your school. It's not boundaries in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. It's assignment. And what always drove me crazy is we would know the assignment was going to change, but the projections would not show that, or they would go overboard. And they never give you more than you think you ought to have. It's always less, it seemed to me. And then what would drive you crazy is once the 20 days came and then you gained 4 teachers, you had to redo your master schedule. That was the part that drove me crazy. It was always, the first 20 days you were, trying to find desks and books. You had all these extra students, and they were sitting in one another's lap in the classroom, and you were trying to find resources for them. And then you knew you were going to have to wait 20 days to get another teacher. And then, were they out there? Were they going to send them? Were they going to send them with the kids, or, were you going to get some that were displaced from other schools, or were they even any in the pipeline? I mean, it was that way every year in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, every year. Most places aren't like that. You're pretty stable. But yeah, you get a projection about this time of year, about mid-April, you get a projection for the next year. And so because you're supposed to put your master schedule together, you're supposed to have your master schedule done in May. The first run is supposed to be done in May, and it's supposed to be finalized in June. But the preliminary master schedule is due in May. So the projection sheet comes out in April of how many teachers you're going to have, and you organize and how many students they think you're going to have. Working in Charlotte-Mecklenburg for a lot of years, we had some people in pupil assignment who were really good at figuring that out. When Nick Cleto worked over there, Nick was really good. He was always close. He was, I don't know what Nick's official title was, but he was a technician. He was the maps guy and all that. He was the numbers man, and Nick was really good at that. When Nick retired, we got some people in that weren't really good at that. And we would be way off everybody. I know you, I always thought of it as, I know you've seen the old joke about you watch the mailman go from house to house in the neighborhood, and 10 minutes later, everybody comes out and you see all the neighbors exchanging the mail down the block because he put everybody's mail in the wrong box. That's kind of the way it was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. School would start, and then we'd start trading teachers and pupils, getting them in the right place. And we're like, how could you guys be this bad again this year? Weren't you this bad last year? And so it became kind of a sick joke, but it kind of became a joke that we had to change the mail after the mailman come in. He put the wrong mail in everybody's box. Well, they got the wrong numbers in everybody's schools, and here we were trading teachers. And it's very stressful for teachers to get displaced. You need to be sure of your numbers, but that's a central office kind of thing. But and then the third conflict on equity, I've defined the first one. The first one is between traditional public schools, the wealthy and the poor. The second conflict is between public schools and charter schools, which are a form of public school, but legally are only entitled to trailers. They want the money. They get the state money per pupil on a monthly 10 installment basis at the end of the month, but they want that $3,000 or $4,000 that the local is adding to that 7. They want that in the high wealth districts. The places that put extra money along with the state money, the charters want that. So that's the next conflict for equity. And the third and final conflict on equity right now today in public schools is private and church schools wanting their share through vouchers. So what that means is North Carolina has a low wealth voucher that they're giving out in some low wealth districts that have low performing schools. Those vouchers are worth between $3,700 and $4,200 a year. And they're giving them out on the basis of of low wealth. You're in a low wealth district, but you have your school in your community is a priority school, or is a non-performing school, has been declared low performing. If you have a school that's been declared low performing and you're in a low wealth district, one of the remedies is on a limited basis, the state is offering vouchers. Again, North Carolina's vouchers, I think there's some in South Carolina as well. They're generally worth between $3,700 and $4,200 according to how low the wealth is in your district. Now, those parents can take those vouchers and go over to the local private school. This is for places that don't have charters established. If there's charters, they can go over there, but this is places that don't have a local charter school, and they have local private, either privates or church affiliated schools, and they take that voucher over there, and it's just like money. Can anybody see what the problem might be if you showed up at a private school with a voucher that was worth only $3,700 to $4,200? Anybody priced private schools lately? Tracy, what's it cost to go to Davidson Day, which is only a stone's throw away from you? What's it cost a year to go to Davidson Day? I have to unmute Tracy so she can tell us. Tracy, what's it cost to go to Davidson Day?
I think it's about $12,000 a year for the upper school, like for middle and high school.
It's actually $18,000 for them. For the little ones, it's $12,000. They start at $12,000.
Okay.
For the lower school, it's $12,000. For the upper school, it's $18,000 a year.
Pine Lake Prep is close to me and Tracy.
Do what now?
Pine Lake Prep is close to me and Tracy.
Pine Lake is a charter school.
Yeah, it's free.
It's
not
free.
Private.
So these vouchers, please remember, these vouchers are for areas where they don't have a competing charter school.
So Iredell Charter that was just established this year is the same way.
Yeah. So there's probably not going to be too many. There's probably not going to be too many vouchers in your area, because there are charter school options to the local public schools. Vouchers are for areas like Warren County where there's no charter school. One of my doctoral students is a charter school executive, and they just opened up one in Bladen County down near White Lake, because there wasn't one there. Prior to them coming, students in that county could get vouchers because there was no charter school option, and their local school was low performing. And so that's what's happening with vouchers. But the conflict there is these parents are saying, I go over to my local private school, my local church school, and this voucher won't cover the total cost of my child's education. Most of those in those low wealth areas, those private and church schools run between $6,000 and $8,000 a year. They're not Davidson Day, but they still run between $6,000 and $8,000 a year. It takes about $7,000 a year to educate a kid. They run between $6,000 and $8,000 a year. You show up with a voucher worth $4,000, you got to pay the difference. So that's the equity. That what those people are arguing is when you give me a voucher, it should pay the full price. It's hard to find a school that you can send your kid to for just $3,700 a year. And so that's the third of the equity issues in public school funding right now. The first is internally, low wealth, high wealth, the battle between them. Externally, public schools, charter schools wanting that local money from the local Board of Education, from the county commissioners, wanting all of what the local education agency, the local LEA gets from the county, wanting all of that. Right now they only get used trailers and no money. And then the third is the folks who are in a low wealth district that have a low performing school, they want their voucher worth the price of the private school closest to them, the full price, not just a partial. So those are your three areas of equity right now. I hope I've explained those adequately so that you get an understanding of what the bigger equity issues are. I have a couple of PowerPoints for you tonight that you should look at. I also put a link in there to the SOE, the School of Ed 603 Wikispaces page. It's not WikiLeaks, it's Wikispaces page. That has a lot of these PowerPoints and a lot of other things if you want to dig in and do some more research on finance. My job is to teach you more about school-based budgeting and how your budget has to support your school improvement plan, those things. But you need to be conversant in the equity issue, because that is the financial issue in public schools now, is one of equity. And I have just defined for you those three areas of concern for equity. And hopefully you will understand those. If you have questions, I can hopefully do a better job next time I try to explain it to you. But so equity is not just one thing; it's actually three things. And please remember, if you don't remember anything else, remember it's three things. It's not a single issue. It's three separate issues. And that's what makes it so hard. It's not just a one thing. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved here. It's not just two groups. There's a number of constituencies or stakeholders here, about 6, and that makes it very difficult. And I will answer this question, and then I will kind of editorialize my finish. You can go from a public to a charter. Do you get to keep state retirement or go 401k? Most charter schools don't offer state retirement. There's a couple that do, but if you go with a charter corporation like Charter Schools of America, they have their own private retirement. That's something you better ask before you go. And charter schools aren't required to pay state rate. So if you're a chemistry teacher, see, I taught chemistry and physics, and see, they'd pay me extra. But if you're a PE teacher, they don't pay you but long-term sub pay. Charter schools aren't required to pay state rate. They pay, for scarcity. If 100 teachers apply, there might be one chemistry teacher. There'll be 50 PE teachers, so they don't pay PE teachers. There is no state rate for them. There was where my second home is in Rutherford County. There was a big brouhaha there over the local charter school. Had a kindergarten teacher making $62,000. She was one of the executives in the charter school corporation. It was his wife, and she was making 62 as a kindergarten teacher. If she'd have been in public school, she wouldn't have made but 52. So she was making $10,000 above. And somebody pointed out they could hire plenty of kindergarten teachers for $25,000 in that part of the world. And they're paying her 62. Usually it's the other way around. They don't pay you quite as much, but of course it's according to who you're married to. And that's part of the charter school issue. We don't have, so Kelly said we don't have state retirement. They get a 403B. They do pay us according to the state scale. Well, good for you. Again, the bigger ones pay state scale, like Charter Schools of America, like one of my former students, Wendy, who is the head the headmaster and principal at Forsyth Academy in Winston-Salem. Her company pays state scale. They don't do state retirement, but they do pay state scale. Some of the smaller ones, like I was talking about, the one that was in Rutherford County, Thomas Jefferson Academy, they do not pay state scale. So they may pay you state scale if you're in a scarcity area. If you're not, they don't pay state scale. If you're a PE teacher, they offered my brother-in-law, who was retiring from public school, they offered him, I think, $35,000 as a PE teacher when he retired a while back. They offered him $35,000, which would have been pretty good, if he could draw his retirement at the same time, and he was going to be able to do that. He was making $55,000 when he retired, and they offered him $35,000. And that's basically beginning teacher pay, and that's what they would pay him as. They would not give him his years of experience or his steps. they offered him beginning teacher pay. So in effect, that's state scale. But if he continued to work, he would have been he made $55,000. So those are kind of the tricks of the trade. You better get it all in writing. You better understand it. You better know the questions to ask. There's nothing wrong with working in a charter school. Many of them are great. You know, I go to Forsyth Academy, and I love Wendy, and I love her school. I'll be completely honest with you. I love Wendy, and I love her school. I think they're doing great things there. I've had 3 or 4 interns, had her back in the old days when we still taught 3-hour courses, and I taught in the old bank building downtown in Winston-Salem. She was one of my first students there. Now, this has been a while back. She's done a great job. It's a great place. She was just a teacher there then, and now she's made it all the way to the top. And her school is great. I've had 3 more interns with her. Love her school. Other charter schools, I'm not really happy about. It's the same way with public schools. Some of them I love. Other ones, you know, I'm not excited about. And so this notion that all charter schools are good just because they're no. Bad ones are just as bad or worse than public bad schools. But you need to understand what you're getting into if you decide to make the leap out of regular public into charters. Just make sure you're informed. It's not a bad thing, but make sure you're informed. Now, my last editorial is there is somewhat of a stigma attached to charter schools for public school people. Some of them aren't as tolerant, as my opinion. Some principals absolutely will not hire people back from charter schools. It's just that they have a problem with that. They don't like charter schools. They don't like people who work there. I think hopefully we'll move away from that in the next few years. But now I'm just telling you the truth. That's out there, and you better know that before you go. That once you go, your opportunity to come back to traditional public school will be limited, because there's a lot of people in our business who do not like charters, and are quite angry about it. All right, that's Dr. Hamilton calling me. I guess that means that. Let me tell him. I'm just finishing up class. Can I call you right back? Thank you. So just make sure you know that. And so that's going to be my editorial at the end. I think there's a place for all schools. Everybody's not as open-minded as they need to be about these things. The idea is to educate children the best way you can. A lot of folks, a lot of charter school people don't like public school people, and vice versa. There's a lot of angry there, and it's all based on the equity argument. And so educate yourself better than I've done tonight. At least you know the argument. Educate yourselves on the 3 types of equity issues in education right now. Again, make sure you understand that equity is not a single issue. It's actually 3 issues. And in some places, it's kind of hard to separate the 3. But know those three issues of equity. And so my final question for the night is, does North Carolina do contract schools in addition to charter? We do have, I think you're talking about people like KIPP Academy. We consider them to be charters in North Carolina. Charters have a very broad definition. So contract schools like KIPP, we do have, I think there is one in Durham. We do have a KIPP in Durham, but we consider that to be a charter. All right, any more questions for the evening? Next week, I will cover all of the CAP. I'll recover 1 and do 2, 3, and 4 next week. And then the last week, I will hit upon the PSYOP. Y'all will get, except for Emily, who's with me, everybody else will have Dr. Stedman. This summer, y'all continue right along with him. You've got his intern shell you can put work in during when this class shell closes at graduation on the 12th of May. His shell will stay open and you can continue to use that for peer review and for him to comment. So where you've been putting work in this shell for peer review and comments, you can just switch over to your clinical shell during the 2 weeks that you're off, and keep right on rolling. Please remember, on CAP Task 1, you're going to need to do a Zoom peer review. But after that, the other 3 tasks just have to do written peer reviews. And so use Dr. Stedman's intern shell to do your reviews. All right, Jordan's with us tonight. Jordan's going to be with me or Dr. Neal, Dr. Malia Neal, in a 604 this summer. So those of you that are working with Jordan, I'll arrange it so that y'all are all in. Y'all all be in Dr. Stedman's intern shell, so that y'all can continue to work. Yeah, I'll make sure that Jordan is in that so that y'all can continue to work. So you will work with Jordan this summer right along, just like he was in your 605 class, but he'll be in your in the 605, and so y'all will work with him right on this summer. He already knows that, and so he's going to be in a credit by arrangement course with me this summer. All right, I think that's everything. I think I'm Tracy's as well. I'll make sure that all of you can stay in my shelf, but I'll make sure that all of you have access to Dr. Stedman's shelf before the summer begins, so that you can all work in that shell. Not that I don't mind you working in mine, but I think it'd be easier to put you all in Dr. Stedman's so he can watch you. He's a good watcher. All right. I will see you all next week. I hope you have a good week again. Prayers for all of those that hurt and injured and in the storms this past weekend, and thank you for all of those who are working in the community to make them better.
Say
I'll
bye.
see you next week. Good night.
Say bye. Wave bye. Say bye-bye.